Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Sika for Celluloid Dreams, the movie show's YouTube channel. With us today, filmmaker Gay Dillingham, the director and producer of the documentary Dying to Know, which explores the unique relationship between two iconic American lives. Philosopher, psychologist, author, convict, and lifestyle icon Dr. Timothy Leary, and psychologist, author, and spiritual teacher Ram Dass. In addition to its deep spiritual themes, Dying to Know explores the formative early years of these two celebrated Harvard psychology professors, their diverse backgrounds, family histories, and notable scientific contributions. Gay Dillingham, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. Set and setting, the context for this story. Can you presence that for us, the background for this incredibly rich story you tell in Dying to Know?
Set and setting, very good starting point. Well, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, Ram Dass, two Harvard psychologists, really helped promote, form this idea of set and setting, that you don't take psychoactive substances without preparation. Know what your set and setting is, the condition of your mind and the condition of your environment, who you're with. And it became kind of the premise as a director, which this project started pretty spontaneously in 1995 and turned into a life journey, obviously, over 19 years. But as a director, I chose set and setting as the context for this first dialogue that took place in 1995 when we brought Ram Dass down from the Bay Area, where he was living at the time, together with his old colleague Timothy Leary and friend and soulmate. And my goal as a director was a little risky because I wanted to create the conditions for a really intimate environment where they could just literally be old friends talking and the cameras would disappear. So the risk there is you got two anarchists, of course, and there was a lot of interruption. And I had prepared questions, and Ram Dass was kind of the interviewer, but it was much more of a dialogue between old friends and old friends on the eve of Timothy Leary's death, because he had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And Ram Dass was the first person he called when he was diagnosed.
So the film and the structure, the four-part structure, that just sprang from that organically? Was your vision for the film, was it originally just this dialogue that you were going to film?
That was the first chapter. Once I saw the footage, I pulled my hair out for a little while, realizing how complicated it was, but it was fascinating. And I sat myself in an editing studio for a couple of weeks until I found the matrix of the conversation. And I was born in '65, so I didn't live through a lot of that era. So I had to really go back and do archival work to figure out who are these two guys. You talked about the 4-point, the mandala that I used. That came very much from me. In my own matrix.
We should say probably what the mandala is: birth, life, death, and soul.
Okay, yeah, I used a mandala. The actual mandala is from the book Be Here Now, and then I superimposed a medicine wheel on it. I spent a lot of time with Native people, Hopi and Dene people, and vision questing and so forth. And the medicine wheel for me is an important structure because it's nonlinear, and these guys were very nonlinear. So you come in through the east, which is birth, and you've got life, you've got death, you've got soul, and then there's a little special hereafter. And I always felt that structure from the very beginning, and so I organized the edit around that structure.
I always feel when talking about these two guys, Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, these individuals, people like them, subjects like the ones you address in Dying to Know, the depth of spirituality which forms the basis for and drives this movie, when all is said and done, that I am completely, on some level, inadequate to address. What stance did you feel that you had to take when you approached the making of this movie? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I might have been in a kind of awe. Like, where would I even start? You know, these guys are just their lives are so all-encompassing, so enriching.
Well, I think I understand the question. It's a very good one because it's an unfolding. There was no way I could have presupposed or had an agenda here. And also, I think it was helpful to have beginner's mind because I didn't grow up in the era, so I had to go find out for myself. I knew Timothy Leary a little bit, had seen him once in the '80s, wasn't even all that impressed. It was more the ego, the showman, And then, of course, I read Be Here Now in college, the required reading, the big Bible. Anyway, but I grew up in Oklahoma, so anyway, so the film really unfolded as I created the question for these guys, as I said, because my interest really, I'd say I kind of came in through the death door. That rites of passage we call death, even though it's not just death at the end of the body. It's all the deaths that we need to go through to live more fully, all the ego deaths and transitions. And these two guys had written The Psychedelic Experience. It was based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I had read that when I was young. And I lost a brother when I was 17 years old, and he was 20, and he was fabulous, just loved him. He was the center of my world, and that really brought me to my knees at a young age. So I felt that we had a very upside down relationship to what everyone's going to do. We're all going to eventually leave this mortal coil, and yet we can't really talk about it. And we've outgrown a lot of the religious institutional answers. And so we're trying to birth this new idea and how to be together spiritually and ask these bigger questions and mystery questions. So the film is really not at all about trying to tell anybody what to believe or think. It's just about having these conversations. Yeah. And what I loved about these two guys, because they had such different points of view, and yet they loved each other. They'd call each other soulmates. And here's Leary, the more scientist, thinker, intellectual. Ram Dass, very heart-centered, spiritual, faith. Yes, of course, consciousness goes on. Leary, you're dead when you're dead, or I don't know, the church of doubt, if you will. So I found these guys fascinating, and it's kind of an autobiographical journey for me, because I have those two voices in my head and in my heart. So it's kind of this archetypal conversation between the mind and the heart for me. And it's really about having the deeper conversations. And I want to say that San Francisco is really important to me. A lot of the movement for expanding consciousness started here. And what started out as a conversation with friends the day Timothy Leary had announced he was dying in the media turned into creating the conversation between the two of these guys. But now we're in San Francisco and doing this whole independent theatrical release because we want to continue this conversation. We want to have the deep conversations we all want to have, but seem to be afraid with these taboo subjects, death, drugs. And yet somehow this film is not a bummer. People usually say it's very inspiring.
That it's a really slippery slope, drug use, isn't it? I mean, responsible adults using drugs for serious purposes, like Timothy Leary said in the movie, like spiritual growth, the pursuit of knowledge and personal development. Who's capable of that, really?
Well, we don't have a context in this culture for it, unfortunately. We've lost the shaman class, the seers, the pathfinders, and that is what we have to grow again. In his point of view, one of the fascinating things I found through looking back at the history and the archives, not just the post-prison Leary, is that he started off pretty conservative, as you see in the footage. And, there was a real school of thought, and he was going back and forth between the Aldous Huxleys, who believed this is not for everyone, and the Allen Ginsberg's democratize it's for everybody. Powerful medicine, or drugs, depending on the way you use them.
For want of a better phrase, what do you think these two guys did right and what did they do wrong?
Well, what I love about being around them is just their humanness. What did they do right? They followed their instinct, and they knew things needed to change from the 50s. The rate and impact of the change, they were at the center of this change. And what I like to say to younger people who have no clue who they are, whether you knew them or not, or knew who they were, they've changed your life. If anything, they were just ahead of their time. They really believed that, as Timothy felt, he found the elixir. As a psychologist, what's fascinating is he had a lot of academic writing prior to even taking these substances. It was already asking psychology to do a U-turn. So he was already pushing the system and provocative. And then these substances just expanded and empowered him. And he felt he found the elixir, and he was the cheerleader, right? Properly used, all of that. Well, it's fascinating to me also that he became the symbol, the guy that is blamed for ruining an entire generation.
Richard Nixon called
Yeah,
him the most dangerous man in
yeah,
America.
Richard Nixon. Yep.
I remember that.
And you know, yeah, as Andy Weil says, he was naive. I don't think he understood the pushback he was going to get. So the mistakes, you know, post 2020 hindsight. The thing is, I don't know that it could have been any different, because these substances were going to be out there anyway. Yes, he got blamed. You know, could he? You know, what the film shows is on a personal level, he had a lot of tragedy. He paid a heavy price for the vision he had that he wanted to change. He was a social revolutionary.
His interpersonal relationships.
Yeah,
really,
you know, bright lights cast big shadows, and you know, he was married 5 times, and a wife that committed suicide on his 35th birthday after learning he was having an affair. His daughter later committed suicide. And, you know, yeah, his interpersonal relationships suffered. I think that changed later in life. And Zach Leary, his adopted son, is interviewed and is part of our group actually now in this marketing and the conversations that we're having here in the Bay Area. Zach Leary, who's in the film, will be one of the people that, you know, in these discussions and dialogue. He's fascinating. And a mutual friend, Chuck Blitz, pointed out that if Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert Ramdas had an offspring, they were never lovers, but if he had an offspring, it would have been Zach Leary, because Zach spent 17 years with Tim, longer than anyone had, as an adopted son. And then when Tim died, he very much got close to Ramdas and his teachings, and as a friend and father and mentor. So Zach's a beautiful blend of these two guys. So I'm really happy to have him on the team now, helping, you know, market this independent film. And he's in the film too. And he's in the film, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting how life kind of works sometimes in ways.
And so what did they do wrong? You know, it's interesting to look at Ramdas's life, because, you know, when I did the interview, it was the first time he'd really ever talked about being gay. You know, he was born in 1931, wealthy East Coast Jewish family. It was just not okay. And so you see kind of that setting the context for him being an outcast or a outlier, and how that set him up to even see Timothy as a valuable person to then help think outside the box, get outside the box. And I'd say Richard, you know, Ramdas really paid a heavy price, as did Timothy, for very different reasons. What they would have done differently, interesting. You know, Richard was fired from Harvard. The only person prior to that was Ralph Waldo Emerson. And here's Richard getting fired from Harvard. And at the time, you know, he was a rising academic star, was on the tenure track. And as Timothy said, Timothy ruined his academic career. So now Ramdas thanks Andy Weil, who's in the film, who helped get him fired as an undergraduate, writing some of the investigative journalism for the Harvard Crimson. So it's all a very interesting journey, and I think that your earlier question, this had to unfold, and I had to just pay attention, and I had to grow up myself in order to tell the story. And because the story took so long, it's 80 years of footage from beginning to end. We have a very wide arc, and you know, you get to see these human life stories and relationship, and life happens in relationship, and that's why the focus of the film is their relationship.
Well, I think you just explained too why the film, I think, is so great. Is you did allow it to unfold. You kind of, in a way, stepped aside when you needed to step aside, and yet when you were needed to be whatever you want to call it, the channel, the conduit, you were there. And I think that's why this movie is terrific. Just to wrap this up, somebody described this film as a document for future generations, which I thought was a perfect description of this movie. At the risk of tooting your own horn, what do you see Dying to Know as?
Well, I'm honored that people have said that to me. This is a legacy film that really finally explains this era. And it's not that I did not set out, and it's not a puff piece at all, but telling the story, and particularly seeing Timothy Leary through the lens of Ram Dass means that you're looking at his life through the lens of love instead of judgment. So he gets to be human, but yeah, because I sit between these two generations, the boomers and the millennials, I had to go into it fresh to some degree. And people are telling me they're seeing the film 2, 3, 4 times and getting something different out of it each time. And in doing the film, I realized there's so many stories I wanted to tell, and I worked really hard to keep, packing it in. And I had a great editor, David Leach, and I worked together, and a lot of good people. So, yeah, I think trying to let it unfold itself. At times I judged myself, thinking I'm never going to get this done. I got to hand it to someone else, because I had started 2 businesses in the middle of all this that wasn't even in filmmaking. And I had to set it down. And I was going through guilt, like this has to get finished because this is such important material. But then and I tried to hand it off once, that didn't work so well. But I kept coming back to it because it was haunting me. There was something so seminal, so important there, that finally I realized I'm kind of meeting the zeitgeist now. Finally, the culture wants these subjects. I mean, I've been fascinated since I was 19, I'd say. So it sounds corny, but trust the universe. I mean, every time I've tried to argue with the universe, I get in trouble. But somehow, if you just follow your interests, there's a good chance that other people are going to be deeply interested too. And you can't force things, and sometimes, you got to set them down and pick them back up.
The movie is Dying to Know, Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. We've been talking with Gay Dillingham. Gay, thank you so much
for
being here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.